Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Chucky Season 1 Episode 1. It's called Death by Misadventure. So full spot, well actually not full, well kind of, this is a weird one. This is a weird one because this show is a continuation of a long running movie series. It does feel kind of weird to do a spoiler free review, but at the same time it is kind of an easy jumping on point for new people. So I think I will start spoiler free for this first episode, at least briefly. And I'll give you a warning before I go into spoilers. So, yeah, this is continuing the original continuity of Chucky, of Child's Play. Don Mancini, who wrote the first movie and then went on to direct some of the later entries, has written every single Chucky thing, not including the remake from a couple of years ago, because that's separate and it's its own different thing. This is continuing the continuity that was last seen with Cult of Chucky, just a couple of years before that. It's really not been that long since the last movie, not even including the remake. So I was very curious and excited by the prospect of him showrunning a TV show, continuing that, and especially given where Cult of Chucky left off, with a really big, insane new concept for the Chucky series. And I suspect that some of those elements are going to come into play a bit more as we go throughout the show. There's not a lot of it in this first episode. There's a bit of a tease at one point, but for the most part, this episode is dealing with introducing the new characters, our main cast, and the town, which is the same town that Charles Lee Ray, the killer who is known as Chucky, who is living inside the doll, where he came from. And that's, maybe some of that backstory is something we're going to be diving into as well. But this episode largely revolves around the character of Jake, his drunk father, how he's treated at school, he's bullied, and just stuff around his life as he sort of buys a Chucky doll. He buys a good guy doll, if I remember the name correctly. And just over the course of the episode, I mean, if I was to give my general thought here, honestly, I think the best thing about this first episode, and it's not a surprise that this is handled well, given that it's from the same creator of like all of the original series, is that it handles the teasing of Chucky and the build up to him doing something exceptionally well. Especially once it starts getting to a little bit of movement, when characters maybe see something. Eventually we get to hear the voice, and then obviously by the end of the episode, I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that by the end of the episode it's a bit more overt, it's a bit more open, and because we, unlike maybe say the first Child's Play movie, you can't necessarily keep Chucky and his life-like embodiment, or what you want to call it, his living presence, you can't keep that a secret for too long. You kind of have to deal with that in episode 1 for the most part. So I think the pacing of that is excellent in this episode, and I think all the teases are a lot of fun. I particularly like the first time there's some movement tease with him. So I really dug all that. I think the human characters vary a bit here. It's kind of weird because we're kind of setting up a sort of typical TV cast in a lot of ways. And I think the other thing that I'll credit this is that Chucky still feels like Chucky. Everything around Chucky still feels like... well, everything around Chucky. Like, everything to do with him and the killer and his past and the way the doll operates, the sense of humor he has, the way he kills people, all of that, from all the evidence we get in this first episode, that all feels completely intact. And it feels like a genuine continuation of what Chucky was. But he also does feel like he's been moved into a cable TV show with... not all the characters are great. I think the drunk father character, for example, is a bit too one-dimensional. I actually thought there was a small chance. At the start of the episode, I thought they were going to make him a bit more nuanced by having him kind of try to understand his son that he's not really connecting with, but ultimately not being able to and kind of failing to. But honestly, by the time we get to the next scene with him, when they're having dinner with the uncle who's much more successful, who's rich, we see by the end of the episode he's got a nice big mansion with a foyer with a dual staircase, because nothing says money like a double staircase. And when I say I don't mean two stories, I mean, like, stairs going up either side of the same room to the same upper floor. Anyway, point being is that he's much more successful, and this guy's just this angry drunk, the angry drunk father who's ashamed of his son. He doesn't understand his son, and he's just a bit one-dimensional. He's kind of angry every time he sees him. Later in that episode, there's a moment where he acts out against his son's art project very early on, which felt like it did just kind of jump to that moment, which felt a bit weird. I mean, I get the motivations because he's just had this conversation, interaction with his brother who's much more successful, and a lot of the conversation was them talking about his son, his nephew, the cousin character. What's his name? Junior? Yeah. Aye, Junior. Okay, whatever. He's teasing the main character of Jake, dropping references to the fact that he might be gay. And honestly, in this scene, we don't actually know. There's like nothing to suggest yet if that's true or if this is just like typical, early teen nonsense. Throughout the episode, though, it becomes abundantly clear that our main character is gay, and that's obviously a growing thing. What is the main disconnect between his father and himself, and that's kind of there. So it's doing a lot of the setup with these characters. We've got a bully character named Alexei, who is particularly mean and vicious. One of the things that really stuck out to me in this episode, though, and it gave me a proper laugh actually, is occasionally characters will say things that are very unrealistic, and like a really kind of, for example, at one point the biology teacher, when Lexi's being mean just randomly in class for no reason, or no, actually that's not Lexi, sorry, it's just one of the other guys in the class, but he says something and the science teacher just turns around and says, "Mind your effing business." Like, just drops an F-bomb in class like it's nothing. And there's a couple of lines like that, and it's like, it's not realistic by any means. It feels really weird, but it kind of fits the pulpy world of Chucky, bizarrely. Like, and the type of characters we've had in Chucky movies before, not so much at the start of Child's Play, back in, Child's Play 1, 2, 3 sort of era, but certainly when we switch to Bride of Chucky onwards, this does kind of feel like it fits that type of tone. And I think those little bits of spice kind of add a little bit of flavour to otherwise typical TV characters that otherwise wouldn't really be that interesting, in all honesty. Obviously, we're going to have a longer relationship between Chucky and our main character, Jake. So this episode is about starting that off and putting Jake in this position where he's kind of stuck with Chucky, friends to the end and all that. So the fact that it has to last 10 episodes, even if things change drastically after a certain amount of them, it has to play out differently than the movies do. So there's kind of like a good, like, a good caveat to doing the TV show is that it kind of forces a different structure. It forces a different focus, perhaps, in how Chucky's relationship with the main character builds, because it's not going to be over in 100 minutes. It's, that'll only be at most, 3 episodes worth. And from there, we're going to have to still have this relationship continuing to grow. And I'm sure it'll change at some point. But, so yeah, I mean, I would say that the human drama stuff is a little bit, I don't know, lukewarm at times. It's the sort of thing where in a Chucky movie, a lot of this wouldn't matter too much. I think you have these characters in the movies that sometimes are very one-dimensional, but it doesn't matter that much because they're kind of just there to die quite quickly. And I won't spoil anything for this first episode as to like who dies, if anyone dies in episode 1. Although the episode is called Death by Misadventure, which kind of implies there's at least one death to talk about. So I'll get to that in a bit, but I think taking on that merit, like sort of thinking about it like the characters that would be in a movie like that who are there to just die at some point, there's kind of a balancing act that kind of needs to happen where those characters, we have to be happy being around certain characters for a whole season. And it'll be very interesting to see if it feels like it's nailed that as we get a few episodes in. Like, am I going to be annoyed still dealing with some of these characters? Or are they going to be entertaining enough that I'm like, no, I mean, I'm kind of into this, and I'm kind of, even if they're not realistic characters, you can go the Scream Queens route where they're just very entertaining and silly. Because I love Scream Queens. Scream Queens is probably the template if you want silly horror movie style characters that are going to keep your attention for the show. I think Scream Queens is a good template to follow. And Lexi, I mean, she's not quite a Chanel, but there's definitely some parallels that you could probably draw between them. So, as far as other spoiler-free things to mention, so there is F-bombs. There's not a lot of gore in this first episode. It doesn't feel like it's going to avoid it, though. So we'll see how that goes. Sense of humor seems on point. What I was intrigued by, actually, and this really caught me off guard, is and people love to hear me talk about aspect ratios and the differences in aspect ratios and stuff, but this does have multiple aspect ratios. And what's weird about it, so there's like bookend scenes, which I won't say what they are, but there's like POV bookend scenes, which are essentially 4x3. And I say essentially because it's kind of a gimmicked 4x3 in that it kind of looks like, I actually thought it was the POV, and it turned out not to be this, but I thought it was the POV of a Chucky doll, but inside the packaging, because it had kind of like this almost like, it was like you were looking through the plastic square of the packaging, but there was like frayed edges and like just sort of like, you know, imperfections along the edges. But it ultimately makes a 4x3 image in essence, right? And okay, so that's like a completely different thing. It's a completely separate part of the show. I get why that's different. What really caught me off guard, though, is that there's a couple of just very specific shots. Not scenes, we're not talking full scenes here, we're talking very specific shots in otherwise complete scenes that switch to a wider aspect ratio. The show's regular aspect ratio for the majority of the runtime is basically what I usually refer to as the Netflix ratio, which is that sort of 2.0 to 1, where you've got black bars on the top and bottom, but they're kind of like half size. They're only about yay thick versus the usual chunky ones for your big cinematic movies. There was a couple of shots where it just switched to the full movie widescreen, and we got the big thicker black bars, and they were really sudden, but they were also really quick. Like they were almost blinking, you'd miss them. If you just missed that one shot, you wouldn't have seen that it went to a different aspect ratio. So I'll be very curious to pay attention to that as the show goes on and see if I can see what the thematic link is and why they're choosing those moments to go into. Because it's not like the shots of cities or vistas where you could sort of like say, oh, they want to show more of the landscape or something. Like they're not like that at all. They're kind of, one's in the middle of a kind of a struggle fight sort of moment, and it's just kind of random there in the middle. It's very odd. So very curious to keep an eye on that and see how that progresses. As for anything else, I didn't really recognize a lot of the cast in this. They're all pretty much new to me, other than obviously Brad Dourif voicing Chucky. The only exception to that is that, so I mentioned Jake's father's obviously the drunk character. Jake's uncle is the successful uncle who's rich. So his uncle's wife, well, his aunt, effectively, I recognized her, and it was bugging me. What do I know her from? What do I know this woman from? And it turns out she's actually the lead from Jason X. She's come back to horror, everyone. Lexa Dohig has come back to horror after all this time. The star of Jason X is now the I don't know, the rich mom character on Chucky. So how times have changed. Yeah, and then the cousin character's kind of like, he's also kind of bullying Jake a little bit. Although he's also dating Lexi, who seems to be a really bad influence. There's all this stuff going on. It's pretty typical and straightforward. There's not a lot to get lost in terms of story yet. It's more about teasing when Chucky's going to strike, and seemingly at the very least right now he wants to strike, at least to appear to be doing it for Jake. Like everyone he seems to be targeting is to benefit Jake because they're bad to him. Now, knowing Charles Lee Ray from previous movies, like I don't suspect he's going to be very loyal, and I suspect that there's motives and all sorts of things. But yes, so I'll say spoiler warning though, so I can talk about a couple of specific moments and maybe a tease of the movie continuity kind of creeping in a little bit. Of course, the tease that I mentioned is that when Jake tries to sell the Chucky doll, he finds someone who emails him, who's interested, and immediately this guy phones him. I actually was thinking, before the phone call, I was thinking it might be Tiffany from the movies, but it's a man's voice, and I thought, oh, this might be Andy. Now, admittedly, it's been a while since, I haven't watched Cult of Chucky since it came out. So some of the details of where certain characters ended up are a little bit fuzzy, but obviously the core premise of the ending stuck with me. It was very hard to forget the core premise of the ending because it was such a wild idea. And so clearly, I would suggest at this point that Andy is maybe trying to track down all of the affected Chucky dolls that are at risk of being murderous and being possessed by Charles Lee Ray. That would be the obvious guess, I think, right now. But I'd have to go back and hear his voice again to actually. I mean, I say hear his. I don't mean the phone call. I mean, I'd have to go back and hear Andy's voice from the last movie because I don't know his voice enough to like say, oh, that's definitely him. It's not like a super recognizable voice to me. But that seems to be the one connection so far. We know that Jennifer Tilly is going to pop up at some point. I would suspect maybe Fiona Dorff's character is going to pop up at some point. She was a big part of the last two movies. Obviously, her father is voicing Chucky, so it's not like she's hard to get to in terms of contact. So I would suspect these things are going to come in, but I appreciate them just setting up the show on its own merits right now and kind of like being a nice jumping on point for new people who can follow this without having to know 6 movies, 7 movies even of continuity. So, but it doesn't betray anything in continuity either, especially if you know the ending of Cult of Chucky. You understand enough to know why this doll could be here and why it's Chucky and so on. But all the good stuff is Chucky. It's not that the human characters are bad all the times or anything like that. And they're good fodder for some of the stuff that Chucky does. Like I say, I thought the science teacher was amusing. But the first moment that I really liked with Chucky, because I'm not cool with him killing a cat. Like, I'm not into that at all. Cats are the best. How dare he? Little ginger that he is. But what I did like a lot is when Lexi the bully is left in the biology classroom on her own. And there's a moment before the teachers come back in where Chucky's starting to move towards her very slowly, and it's just enough that she's noticing it. But it's also not so much that she doesn't just kind of like brush it aside and just sort of like freak out a little bit and just like she's just a little bit freaked out, but she's not like enough that she knows for sure it was definitely moving, and that's kind of the fun of the moment. I thought that was a really well handled moment. I thought moments like and this was something the movies did a lot as well, like when Jake's trying to stuff Chucky into his locker and we just see the head ramming in and not being able to go in, and you can just like imagine Chucky internally being pissed that his head's been rammed into this locker repeatedly. Are just little lingering moments when the teacher's putting him in the cupboard and you can just see like her face through the crack in the door for a brief moment, just lingering there as she's kind of looking like this doll's kind of creepy kind of thing. So all of that stuff I think is handled well enough, and then ultimately Chucky striking with the father and killing the father, which is why I'm not really that upset about him being kind of one-dimensional in the end. I was disappointed when he turned one-dimensional after I thought they were going to make him a bit more of a multi-layered character. But once he got killed by the end of the episode, it was like, well, he's already dead, so it doesn't really matter. He kind of served his purpose. He was an asshole. I don't feel bad that he died, which is part of the charm of it, is we get to enjoy this a little bit. And he vomits whiskey onto a exposed electrical cable, which electrocutes the asshole dad, and that's kind of his big moment. The other big moment with Chucky, though, that's not violent related, is the talent show, which Chucky shows up at, yells something out, and then kind of has Jake pretend to be a ventriloquist, so that Chucky can basically go up on stage and say whatever he wants. And he's stolen the bully's phone, Lexi's phone, reveals a couple of things about her. What was it? She likes Pokemon porn and searches why her fart smells so good. Funny stuff, stupid, Chucky stuff, but amusing. I kind of like, again, talking about people reacting or doing things that feel unrealistic. The way they all just clapped at the end as Jake's been pulled off stage by the teachers because it's going too far. Chucky says, "Yeah, you're all a bunch of assholes. I hate you, all you effers," or something. He says something to that effect, and they're all like, yeah, oh, that's so impressive. Like, I don't know if a room full of mostly parents would be popping for that. I feel, there's a sort of slightly flipped logic to the world, which I don't actually mind. Like I don't want to say it to make it feel like I'm complaining about that. I think that's just getting into the mood of what this world is. I brought up Scream Queens earlier. That was not a real world. That was a cartoon horror world, and it kind of feels like this is not quite as cartoony, but definitely isn't quite presented as real either, and that's neat. I will say the one human character kind of interaction that I thought was handled very well was, so there's a true crime kid in class named Devin, right, at his school, and he has a true crime podcast, and we see Jake listening to this a couple of times, and we kind of get from one or two moments that he's probably attracted to this Devin guy. There's a scene where they're in the cafeteria and Devin comes up to talk to him, and it's this really awkward back and forth exchange of like, what were you listening to, Aiden? Jake doesn't want to admit that he was listening to his podcast, so he kind of makes something up, and there's a bit of back and forth. What I really liked about this is that despite the fact that without explicitly, I mean, okay, technically someone did say Jake was gay earlier in the episode, but it was kind of in a way where it may not have been a real thing. I liked that this scene legitimately felt like an awkward conversation between, at the very least, one person out of the two is attracted to the other, and we get that that awkward budding romance kind of thing coming out of it. It felt natural. Well, maybe natural's not the right word. It felt natural in the sense that it felt like a trope that you normally see with a straight couple. Normally, this would be the girl sitting down to talk to the nerdy guy who's into her, and he says something dumb, and he kind of like feels bad that he said something dumb. We get kind of that here, and it kind of plays perfectly well, and you kind of get from them using a normal relationship TV trope to kind of communicate like the way they are with each other. And it was played up upon as well in the Chucky stand-up comedy bit where he's doing the ventriloquism, where Chucky says, "I'm your friend to the end, Jake, but just friends, no more than that. Not that there's anything wrong with that." I could almost hear Jerry Seinfeld going, "Not that there's anything wrong with that." But yeah, it was a funny moment, and it kind of like was lightening the mood. It's like Chucky's actually doing good for his life in a weird way, aside from the murder, obviously. But it's interesting to sort of see it with this different group of characters and how they're going to use Chucky with everyone. So at the end of the episode, after his dad's dead, he moves in with his uncle and his auntie. His auntie's got a secret, is concerned about it. Chucky does finally just start talking completely and openly to Jake. Says that he did him a favor. There's a funny moment here actually where they're talking about the dad, and Chucky says, I know an asshole when I see one. But then halfway through the conversation says, I thought, I was talking about the cat, which was funny, although still, screw you for killing a cat. But at the end of the scene, he's like, okay, let's talk about that bitch Lexi, and he pulls out his butcher knife, and it's kind of this, nice cliffhanger moment of, okay, Chucky's going to be around in his life, Jake's not going to be able to get rid of him, and he's going to keep getting in the way and murdering people. The police, I think it's Devin's mum, if I remember right, who is the cop, and she, has written this murder off as an accident, but death by misadventure, as the title says, but, there's a little bit of a twitch in her nose. She smells a mystery, and sure enough here, this is kind of like going to continue, and presumably Jake's going to be at the center of all this and be blamed and be the prime suspect in a lot of shady things. So just little things like having a bloody nose because his dad pushed him against the wall and hit him, and him not admitting that to the police, it seems a bit dodgy, like he's covering up a motive. Little things like that. So yeah, my only real concern at this point is that I hope if Jake is going to be suspected of murder, and if he is going to have to cover his tracks, and if there is going to be false accusations, I really hope that stuff is fun and not tedious, because it really could be tedious having to go through those motions if they're not just going to play it for the right amount of humor, the right amount of jokes. And I think what was so nice about this is that all the stuff with Devon's like loner like kind of status and his budding kind of relationship with this guy and the awkwardness of around him not really being out of the closet but kind of everyone just kind of assuming it already, but his dad been kind of hateful about it, is that it did kind of, it was kind of treaded into sort of melodrama at points. There was like melodramatic kind of overtone kind of starting to linger over it. And I think what's so great is that when Chucky started talking about it during the ventriloquist thing, all of a sudden it made it feel all okay. It made it feel like it fit in this Chucky world. And it kind of like lightened the mood a little bit. And it kind of felt like Chucky came along and gave it all this context and gave it this kind of lens that, okay, now we're really playing with this. Now we're really getting into like, I don't know, just like a unique setting and what's going to make this show, because you've got two avenues to look at this from. You've got Chucky's here to make what would otherwise be a teen drama show more interesting, but you've also got a teen TV show is here to shake up what the Chucky movie formula was, because it has to change to adapt to that. So ideally, both of those things colliding are going to make something that genuinely feels a little bit exciting, interesting, at the very least engaging is what you'd hope. So yeah, it's it wasn't bad. I think the Chucky stuff in particular is quite good, and hopefully all of the other stuff grows on me a little bit better. But how it integrated with the Chucky stuff so far, I thought was not bad overall. I will say, and obviously I should mention the bookends. Turns out to be a flashback to when Charles Lee Ray was a little boy. So we'll see how that plays into things as the season goes on. But yeah, I don't really have any hot takes. It's not like a complete home run of a first episode, but a lot of potential, and if nothing else, that the Chucky stuff itself feels solid. It feels like it still feels like Chucky, and that, I guess that would be the concern. So neat. So there you go. And I didn't even mention Jake's weird sculpture made out of doll parts that look like something you'd find in a serial killer's basement. I don't have anything to really say except that's what it looked like. If you're gonna be creative, I guess. No judgments from me. So no, very good. Alright, well obviously I'm in for episode 2. We'll see how it goes. And hopefully I've got more good things to say, and you know, maybe the elements that aren't quite as interesting yet it'll start to pick up a little bit more. That's it. It wasn't too drawn out either, because this is a you know, without commercials, this is down to under 45 minutes, give or take. So it doesn't feel like it's super drawn out like, you know, some other shows are these days. So that's also nice. But yeah, so let me know what you thought of episode 1 of Chucky in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. And if you want to support the show, you do all those things, of course, but you can also do it financially over at patreon.com/mailedfuzztv for as little as $1 per month, and get some bonuses and help keep all the content coming. And of course, I should mention that if you want to check out reviews of all of the Chucky movies, you can find all those as well, because me and Tim did them on Screams After Midnight, our horror movie podcast. So yeah, head over to Mail Fuzz Movies. Most of the old episodes are actually still on this channel, but the playlist for the Chucky movies, which I'll link in the corner, is over on that channel. So go and have a look and see if you're see what you think of the movies. You know, you're always curious to hear. So thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?